Hi, I'm Katie Hines-Shah, Senior Pastor of Redeemer Lutheran Church and author of this summer's Gather Magazine Bible study, Crafted in Christ. This Bible study encourages us to a time of rest and renewal, thinking about our lives and our communities through the metaphor of the quilting process. This month, we'll be thinking about patterns, the patterns of creation, the patterns of work and rest, choosing new patterns, and changing our patterns for good. Behind me is a quilt that my congregation made when we were on sabbatical this summer. You can see that in the centerpiece is a cross. The pattern reminds us of the central focus of our lives as Lutherans. Around it are squares representing the various members and families in this congregation. Though the squares are different, when it comes together, it is a beautiful piece to behold. This quilt reminds us of our unity, even in our diversity. Following this introduction, I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine who will help us think a little more about the patterns of Sabbath, of rest and renewal, and will tell us a little more about sabbaticals. You might get some ideas for your own congregation and pastor's sabbaticals. So I'd like to introduce you all to my friend Rob Saylor. He's the director of the Lilly Endowment Clergy Renewal Program at Christian Theological Seminary, and he also teaches theology and culture on the faculty there. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
Really happy to see you, Katie. Thank you so much for the invitation.
It's my pleasure, and thanks again to everyone at the Clergy Renewal Program. I really enjoyed the opportunity to go on sabbatical, thanks to the generosity of the foundation.
Well, I was a pastor for a number of years, and when I think about what we're able to do in supporting pastors and congregations like yourselves who are on the front lines, especially in these incredibly topsy-turvy times, what it means to live in the world right now, what it means to witness to the gospel right now. I'm so grateful to pastors who are out there keeping the faith and maintaining such great ministry during these times. So it's a real pleasure.
Well, thank you. And I will say from my own experience, it really did help to have that break in this time. I think I was much more productive coming out of sabbatical because I had that time to step back and reflect before jumping back in. But since so much of this Crafted in Christ Bible study is about Sabbath this season, I thought, what better person to ask than somebody who specializes in sabbaticals? So I wanted to ask you just straight up, what does Sabbath mean to you?
It's a huge question. It's a great question. When I think about it, especially in light of the work that we do, what I think about is how easy it is in our contemporary world to define ourselves by what we do and by what we achieve. And even when we think about our faith, even when we think about what it means to be a disciple, it's very easy for that kind of mindset to creep in. It's like, oh, my discipleship is defined by my actions, my achievements in the faith, and so on. To me, Sabbath, in its deep, deep Hebrew Bible roots, as maintained beautifully by our Jewish sisters and brothers, and then as received in the Christian faith, is really nothing less than God's own message, God's own gift that says, at the end of the day, what defines us is not what we do, what we achieve, or even the work that we put in. What truly defines us is the fact that we are seen and known and loved by God. And Sabbath to me truly is resting in that fact. When I think about the word rest, I often think about St. Augustine, and he defined enjoying something as resting in it for its own sake, as opposed to using something. To truly enjoy something is to rest in it because it itself is good. And so I think when we think about Sabbath as God's invitation to rest, it is not only the deep joy and pleasure of enjoying God, but it is a reminder that that truly is what we are created for. All of our achievements or or not, all of the work we do or don't do, it's it has its place, but truly what defines us is the fact that we are known and that we are created to enjoy God.
Oh, I love that. And of course, referencing the Augustine, our hearts are restless until we rest in thee, right? So that ultimate kind of rest in the joy of Christ. That's so, I think, counterintuitive for so many of us, particularly I imagine for many of the people who'll be reading this study, who a lot of busy women who are reading this study, who really think, I need to get dinner on, I need to get the kids out, I need to volunteer at church, I need to get my work done, I need to so many things. How do we even start to get off that race?
There are, it's a great question. I mean, for our programs, there really is no substitute for just sheer physical time where you step back from the main obligations. Now, when it comes to things like family, when it comes to things like household, I'm very aware that that is easier said than done.
Yeah, you've got a couple of kids yourself, don't you?
Yeah, 5. So I mean, it's so no, so I get it. So if it can't be a literal stepping away, I think it does need to be a very intentional and a very severe kind of looking at your time and saying, where is it that we have opportunities, even if we have to still do the work? What is cluttering our sense of anxiety around it? In other words, if we have kids, we've still got to get them to school, we've still got to clean the house and so on. But I think some Sabbath can really come in if we examine what is the expectation, what is the demand that we place on ourselves, that this has to happen according to a certain kind of expectation or excellence. And if you can start to declutter that, I think for many people, not all, then there maybe even some of the physical time of just setting some things down might arise. But even if the physical time of really just kind of stepping back doesn't quite arise in the same way, I think the mental, spiritual letting go of, look, there's no sort of big other placing a demand on you in this regard that you have to live up to. I mean, one example of that is that I think oftentimes even our free time gets colonized by these expectations and these demands. It's like, oh, I have an hour free, the kids are away at something, I should exercise, I'm out of shape. Or even if it's like we're going to a concert or we're going on a vacation, we put so many demands on ourselves. It's like, this must be a transcendent, mind-blowing,
Instagrammable, right?
Instagrammable, yeah. That's a whole other layer, this sort of the public performance and curation of our lives for this. But we put so much pressure, even when it's time to relax, even when it is time to recreate. And so there, I think, for some people, I think spiritual disciplines can intervene in that. I think for some people, just sort of, I teach a course on C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis has this great line where he says, if you find yourself just getting tied up in knots around, should, shouldn't, and all that, just laugh at yourself. just laugh. Luther said something quite similar.
I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about pastor sabbaticals. A lot of people haven't even heard of this concept. Can you tell the audience a little bit about pastor sabbaticals and maybe how they differ from academic sabbaticals, or maybe even just what they are to begin with?
Sure. So the Lilly Endowment Clergy Renewal programs have been going on for over 20 years now. We here at the seminary have been administering them on behalf of the endowment for the last 10 years. But 20 years ago, when the programs were formulated, it came about because the Lilly Endowment started asking pastors, how is it that we can help? What is it that you really need? The endowment, it has money from Lilly Pharmaceuticals. It has quite a few resources, and its mission is to strengthen U.S. Christianity, particularly with an eye towards strengthening its leaders. So it was asking pastors, how do we help? What can we do? And over again, excellent pastors were saying, we still love the ministry, we still want to be about this work, but if we could just have a little bit of time to step back, reorient, enter into the Sabbath time, we really think that not only would that recharge our batteries, but it would give us fresh perspective and a kind of reconnection with why it is we were called in the first place. And so the programs began 20 years ago as kind of an experiment around that. And here we are with lots and lots of data and lots of stories like yours of people saying, yeah, that worked. What is a pastoral sabbatical? Whatever else it is the pastor stepping back from day-to-day obligations within the congregation, supported by the congregation in such a way that the pastor truly can be away. And that means providing for pastoral coverage, emergency coverage within the congregation, that sort of thing, so that the pastor can do whatever it is she or he needs to do in order to really reconnect with what gives them life spiritually and as human beings. And we give grants that allow for that to take place via travel, via pastors pursuing passions of theirs, whether that's intellectual or whether that's just life passions like art. And
or quilting, huh?
Or quilting, yes, or quilting. We have funded many quilting oriented leagues, and what we find when that happens is that pastors not only sort of reconnect with what it is that called them into ministry in the first place, but they do come back sort of with new eyes towards, how do I keep this going? How do I sustain this? We've all that's something that's different between sabbaticals and vacations. Vacations are great.
Yeah.
But, we've all had that experience of, okay, you go away on vacation, you're super relaxed, and then the first morning or the first day back, it's like there you are right back into it, right?
Right.
Hopefully with a sabbatical, because it's a more intentional time away and a real reflection. When re-entry happens, there's a kind of transformation. And the other thing I'd say about that is that we like to think about sabbaticals as a journey that the congregation and the pastor go on together. Yes. So for instance, in our program, the grants are actually applied for by the congregation, and the congregation receives the grants. And the reason why that's so important to us is we don't want a situation where the congregation sort of grudgingly lets the pastor go on sabbatical. We want a situation where the congregation and the pastor are dreaming together. How can this be a time that is beneficial for everyone involved? And that can look many different ways, because congregations are all wired differently, and that's a good thing. But whatever else happens, we want it to be thought of as a shared journey between the pastor and the congregation. And when that happens, the results can just be, it's like alchemy. It's just magic happens at that point.
Love it. This is great. And as I think about reading the first creation story and the idea of a day of rest, and then expanding into Leviticus and the idea of the Sabbath year and the jubilee, I think that I can start to see how this in a smaller way brings that to life. I mean, the thing that you always read in the commentaries about the Jubilee year is that it never happened, right? There's no evidence that it ever happened, and yet that ideal, I think, is a beautiful thing to imagine and reach for, and maybe this 12-week or so sabbatical captures a little of that essence in a way that maybe a Sunday morning worship service captures that essence of the Sabbath day for many of the busy people who are watching this now.
If people, if I can just say a quick thing on that. I mean, people often ask me, well, why should pastors get these sabbaticals and not these other folks? And there are a couple of different answers to that question. One way of answering it would be to point out the sort of constant on-call nature, the 24/7 aspect of ministry, the way it impacts families. All of that is true. But the way that I actually prefer to answer it is to say, well, no, I think everyone should get sabbatical. My particular work, the Lilly Endowment's particular work, is about pastors in this. But in my perfect world, and the world I would like to see, society would structure things in such a way that long-term healthcare workers,
Mm-hmm.
long-term caregivers, kindergarten teachers,
Mm-hmm.
custodial agents, people who do all sorts of work across society have the same kind of opportunity.
Yeah.
I teach at a seminary, and so we often talk with students about what is the nature of pastoral leadership in these times. And increasingly, I tend to think about that. Irenaeus said the joy of God is the human being fully alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there was once a time where pastors were sort of supposed to be superhuman, not saying that
Mm-hmm.
was ever good, but if that was ever kind
Yeah.
of the image of pastoral authority, now I think one of the best things pastors can model is just being human.
Yeah.
Um, my wife works with another Lilly funded program related to pastoral debt relief and like
Mm.
the economics of pastoral ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what is behind that work is thinking through, okay, when we say we don't want pastors to be in debt, part of what we mean is we want pastors to
Yeah.
model what it is to be free of crippling debts, to be
Yeah.
free of bad debts, and to model that kind of economic health for their people. So in
Right.
other words, I think increasingly pastoral ministry is going to be pastors modeling humanness,
Mm-hmm.
not superhumanness. And I think sabbatical Sabbath rest is part of that.
To try on these ideas that sometimes seem on paper like they might be too crazy or too radical, and then go, oh, look, not only does it work, but it's kind of a great way to be. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel like this will be another way to get in depth. And if people want to learn more about the clergy renewal programs that Lilly sponsors, where should they look?
We have a website that has a great deal of testimony, both from pastors, but also from congregational members that have done this. It's just Lilly Clergy Renewal. .org. You can find us on the web or just Google us, Lilly Clergy Renewal Programs.
And that's with two L's, right? Lilly
Correct.
with two L's.
Yeah, you can find us there, and we have a staff that is very eager. Something we always really want to do is walk with congregations
Mhm.
at every stage along the way, including even just discernment at the beginning stages. So people can find us there, and I hope they don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Blessings.
Thanks for joining us in this Crafted in Christ Bible Study series. I look forward to speaking to you more in the weeks to come, and I hope you find times of rest and renewal through your work too. God bless.